wanted to start off with is,
Yeah.
where was your foundation in sports nutrition, and where did you get your start?
Well, I mean, it's really like the journey of a lifetime to a certain extent, right? Like I I've been training in some capacity. At first, it was for sports, but I mean, even back, like, I joke around and I say, like, there's a picture of me in 1986 wearing Jordan ones, doing curls with my Hulk Hogan dumbbells. You know what I mean? And that's
Awesome.
like,
Yeah.
that's like, I was like, I was a little kid and I was already sort of on that track to some extent, right? Uh, but then, in my teenage years, I really began to train like with intensity and consistently for sports, specifically for basketball, but never necessarily with the idea in mind of like falling in love with specifically with weight training, specifically with bodybuilding culture or any of that stuff. It just kind of evolved naturally. Um, but I started using supplements on a regular. I mean, I was taking my vitamins as a little kid because my mom did. Um, and in so many ways she sort of encouraged every phase in my life that ended up not being a phase, that ended up being like the stuff that defines my life to this day and all my passions to this day. A lot of that stuff started with my mom. But I started taking supplements and using supplements and reading about supplements and reading the magazines, and all that sort of thing when I was in high school. And then eventually when I ran out of road, like, trying to be a 5'11" Pistol Pete,
Uh,
I kind of have naturally evolved to weight training. And then
okay.
the gap that was left in my life, the void that was left from not playing hoops on a serious level anymore, was now filled by the gym.
Hmm.
And that just grew in intensity and enthusiasm, into my 20s. And when I was taking supplements seriously all through college. And then when I got out of school, I was doing freelance stuff and I was working as a trainer and I was working as a bouncer. And myself and my buddy, Mark Bernardi, who's, the other guy who keeps G Code rolling every day.
Uh,
He and I wrote and produced and directed an independent film, and like did the indie circuit with it and whatnot. And in the process of doing that stuff, the other half of my life was weight training and taking supplements and whatnot. And I would read the magazines religiously and all that stuff. And in terms of like an actual foray into the industry, I had a Flex magazine probably in like 2003, and I saw an animal ad, an early animal ad, an early black and white animal ad. And it just resonated with me because it depicted the sport and the lifestyle and the subculture in a way that I hadn't really seen before, right? Like I love like
mhm.
pumping iron, and I love like the black and white grit of Blood and Guts with Dorian's Blood and Guts, right?
Uh,
But in terms of looking in the magazines and whatnot, like bodybuilding was always kind of flashy and it was kind of showy, and it lacked a certain warrior ethic or something. There's something about it that seemed like it was missing. And when I saw that first animal ad, it depicted the subculture and the sport and the lifestyle in a way that resonated with me. And it felt strangely, its aesthetic felt slightly hip hop to me. And I know that, not once I got to know the guys behind the scenes, I realized that wasn't one of their influences, but, it felt like early Wu Tang, protected
uh,
at Wu Tang to a certain extent too, right? In that it was gritty and industrial, and there was urban decay involved, and there's work boots and all this stuff that just felt kind of spoke to me on that level also in terms of aesthetics. So when I saw that ad and I'm reading the ad and I like, did a little bit of research on the company, I'm like, holy shit, they're based in Jersey, and I was living in
mhm.
Brigantine outside of Atlantic City, where I grew up, and I was like, holy cow, this company's based in Jersey. Like that's nuts. So they had an email address, so I was like, oh, I'm just going to email them and say, So I emailed them. I said, hey, I'm a writer and I'm a filmmaker and I live this shit 24/7, 365, and I love it, and I you know, this ad really spoke to me, blah, blah, blah. You know, there's got to be something I can do for you guys, was basically what I was saying, like pitching my skill set to them, you know, so that I want to be a part of it. And surprisingly enough, they got back to me. And when they got back to me, they invited me to come up and meet them, and we hit it off immediately. So for a couple of years, they gave me a gig where I was basically writing a blog, writing feature articles, getting paid for that stuff, working their trade shows, and then having a supplement allowance. So I got paid to write, I got paid to do the trade shows for them, and I got my supplements for free every month. So that was like a dream, right? Like that was like the dopest thing ever, the dopest opportunity ever. And so I did that for a couple of years, like freelance stuff. And then right around the end of like sort of that freelance period, before I started working there full time, myself and Mark had negotiated a deal to do a DVD series for them that was based on those Brian Moss ads, and it was featuring their new athlete, Frank McGrath. Yep. So we did an entire training series of DVDs that we shot and edited and, you know, did everything start to finish, basically top to bottom. And as that happened, they had a full-time opening for me that they offered me as our like relationship grew. And that's how I got my foot in the door there, right? So like I started off there as like a marketing specialist, I think was my title. And I was there for 11 years, kind of through their boom years. And in the time I was there, you know, there wasn't an aspect of what they did there that I didn't have a hand in, you know. So it was everything from product formulation to clothing design to label design to starting the video department there to writing the national ads to all that stuff, you know, to like their grassroots programs and all of that. And I was there for 11 years. And when I left, by the time I left there, I was the brand director for Animal. Yep. So, you know, it's like a brand and a company that I pumped like a lot of my life force into for a long time, you know, 13 years. And I always say too, like if you were looking to try to start a supplement company, it would be like if you were looking to do a tech startup and you had a 13-year internship at Apple before you started your tech company. That was kind of what it felt like, you know, to a certain extent.
Yeah, and by that time you have most of the relationships in place that you need, right?
Yeah, you know, to some extent, you know, I knew a ton of people in the industry, but I was the vast majority of everything that I did was on the branding side. So I felt like in terms of marketing and brand building, you know, I learned so much in my time there, and I created friendships, like our friendship in my time there. The things that absolutely positively impacted us, you know, once we were out on our own and doing our own thing. But I wasn't on the sales side, so that was like that was one of the more eye-opening experiences in starting my own brand. It's like trying to build those kind of relationships and you know, almost out of necessity, pivoting to doing more sales work and trying to grow the business that way, you know, almost, you know, essentially one account at a time, one relationship at a time, one brick and mortar store at a time. And that's still an ongoing process to this day. And it's hyper competitive, and, you know, the industry's evolved so much over the past 20 years, and you know, commerce in general has, you know, like, you know, from e-tailers to Amazon, and, you know, it's not the death of brick and mortar. I don't think that's fair at all. It's just sort of the evolution of brick and mortar, where there's more and more of these places that do it and do it well. But it's just not as the supplement store and its place in the industry just isn't as prevalent as it once was, simply because of technology, let's be honest, simply because of Amazon. So, you know, it's trying to navigate that landscape where sales isn't really where your background is, and where it's an ever evolving space in terms of sales.
Mhm.
So trying to figure that stuff out is a constant point of focus. But in terms of the brand building and product development and those sort of things, and at our best also, like extending some of that tradition of whether it's written content or video content, and doing that stuff in an effective way that maybe some of the competition uh, doesn't or isn't inclined to or doesn't need to, right? Like it's a place where I feel like we can be strong at our best, and it's one of those
Mhm.
things too. I talk about this industry in this way, right? Where like I feel like in life, like philosophically, right? You can call it, you can even liken it to your relationships, right? But sometimes you have to choose between style and substance, right? And I feel like in our industry, a lot of the time, and like there are even very successful companies who are making a lot of money, but who
Oh yeah.
don't deliver much of either of those things, not style
Mhm.
or substance, right? And I feel like in our case, at our best, we have the potential to deliver both. And like,
Right.
so that's like a point of differentiation. And it's always like sort of the standard that we strive to. It's like, how can we be a brand that's cool, that delivers effective products that people like and believe in, but that also provides value, right? Like it's a cliche, but like if you
Mhm.
can do things to provide value, whether it's inspiration or information or education or that sort of stuff, um, that gives you, I think, a leg up on the competition. And people feel loyal to a company where they feel like they know who's behind the scenes, and they know that person or those persons have their best interests in mind. So like
Right.
I always try to keep that in mind also.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it goes back to authenticity with a brand. Like you're in a unique position where you are part of the brand,
Yeah,
right? It back to if you read, your first three books that you wrote, like this
yeah,
brand makes sense to have
right,
been started by you, so you're attached to it. You're
right.
the face of
No,
it.
very
So you have,
very much so. Yeah, no, that
yeah,
commitment to authenticity is a huge thing, right? And it's like because ultimately, like if you talk it and don't live it, then I think people feel that. I think people feel that over time. I think people feel that. And if the companies that you support are sort of faceless and empty in terms of their actual passion and love and commitment and enthusiasm to the industry and the culture. If a company lacks that, even if they have a product that you like, or even if they have a label that looks cool or whatever, over time, I think it's just natural to not be loyal,
right.
to them, because they're not giving you anything to believe in or care about. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And one of the things with our brand that I always try to keep in mind also, and that's through thick and thin too, right, is the idea that like there are so many brands out there, right? So many brands, hyper competitive, right?
Yep.
And many have come and gone in the time that we've been around, right? But there's so many brands out there, and you know what, man? Like, there's so many brands that are doing good work and making quality products and all that stuff, and aren't run by charlatans and scumbags, right? Like, there's are good people in this industry, Also, there's people who are skeptical about this industry and don't trust a lot of the brands in this industry, and it's valid. But then at the
Hmm.
same time, there's lots of good people and
Yeah.
quality individuals who are in it for the right reasons also. So like you see all these brands out there, all sort of delivering different things, but in similar categories, and there's a lot of overlap in the products and whatnot. And there's innovation is not something that happens every day in our industry, right? So you realize like that when somebody goes online or goes to a supplement store or a gym or whatever, and they pull out their wallet and they put down their hard-earned money and they're buying your product when they can
Hmm.
buy any one of 25 other pre-workouts or any one of 25 other proteins or whatever, like that's a big deal. That's a big
Yeah.
deal. Like That has never been lost on me. Like the thought that you could easily support any of these other 80 brands, but for whatever reason you chose to support ours. And like, you know, that is a gesture that, like I said, is just never lost on me, and that I will forever be grateful for. And like, I feel like every day with our brand, like we work to try to be worthy of that gesture, you know, and I try to keep that in mind at all times, you know, that somebody could easily vote with their consumer dollar for any other brand, but they, in this instance, they chose us, and it's like, okay, well, how do we continue to be worthy of that, you know? And that's
Right.
that's one of the driving forces, you know, behind what we do, is trying to be worthy of that commitment and that gesture and that investment in us and that vote in us, right? The consumers vote with their dollars, right? So you go to the supermarket and, you know, sometimes you're obviously making principles based on just value, right? Bang for your buck and whatever. And then other times there's two different products made by two different companies and the price is the same and they're in the same category and you choose one over the other. That's a vote, you know? And you
Yeah.
decided to choose the one over the other for whatever reason. And it's like, and that's a big deal, you know? That's a big deal.
Mhm.
You put your consumer dollar and you put it behind a company and you know who they are and what they stand for and their products. And, you know, it's just, that's never been lost on me. That's not, it's
Yeah.
a big deal to this day, you know?
And I think that that sets you guys apart from a lot of the other brands where, there's a ton of guys in this industry and girls in this industry that are um, entrepreneurs who aren't necessarily fitness enthusiasts or haven't
Right.
lived this lifestyle, who are just looking to build a brand and sell it,
Sure.
and
Sure.
make the money. And, this is all just numbers on a spreadsheet to them,
Sure.
and,
Sure.
and they're
Sure.
trying to get rich.
Of course.
There's very few brands that are in your position where um, you care as much about the actual product, the consumer experience. It's personal for you.
It's very personal, man, and we want to do our best to convey that to people. You know, we want to do our best to convey that to people, and to make them feel that. You know, even if it's just in our interactions, you know, with them, even if it's just a customer service email. Like, I don't know if I've ever had a vendor email, customer service email that I put some form of this phrase in, which is like, I appreciate your faith and support of our brand.
Uh-huh.
Because that's what it is, right? Like, you're supporting it with your consumer dollar and like you're putting your faith in us. Like, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, you know? And it's like, without that faith and support, you don't have a chance, you know? And it's like,
Right.
so every time we have those kind of interactions, I try to get across to those people what they mean to us. You know what I mean? I try to
Mhm.
get that across, and even in that small way. But yeah, there's always some version of like, I appreciate that faith and support because it's priceless. You know, it's priceless.
Yeah. So you're at Animal for 11 years. At
Yeah.
what point during that run did you have this idea to start your own brand, or was that always the plan for you?
Man, you know, it wasn't necessarily always the plan. It was, I started, I had written a script. It's you know, a weird story, a winding road, right? But I had written a script about a bodybuilder in Jersey called Go Hard. And the script was essentially like Rocky meets The Wrestler meets American History X, something like that, right?
Okay. Uh-huh.
And
Do you have the script still?
I
I
have
want
the
to see
script.
it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I'll send it
Send
to
it
you.
my way.
I'll send it
That's
to you for
awesome.
sure. And I felt very strongly about it, right? But you know, my experience in on the fringes of the entertainment industry and you know, with indie films and all that stuff, you just realize how difficult it is to like get a film made through traditional means, right? To
Hmm.
raise money for a film through traditional means, and like, even if the script is unbelievable and even if the final product is incredible, it doesn't even necessarily translate to some sort of success or some doors opening. And then you can say that for anything, right? So wrote this script. I sent it to the few contacts I had. I got a lot of positive feedback, and that's about as far as it went, right? So then one day I had this epiphany. I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't it be really interesting now that I have this script that I feel so strongly about to start to promote the project before the project exists, right?
Okay.
So myself and my buddy Travis, who was working with me at Animal and Universal at that point, we were kind of just on the same page with stuff. And Travis is one of the guys who helped me start G Code. He was our art director for the first like 6 years we were in business. Incredibly good dude, incredibly talented graphic artist. And he and I were just on the same page with hip hop and sports and all that stuff, right? And we would train together and we would just talk this stuff through. And I sort of pitched him the idea. I was like, what if we just kind of created this thing? And in the process of doing this thing, like maybe we create excitement and energy for this project, and then I'm able to get this script into some level of development. So we started to make graphics, and then that sort of led to starting to make clothing. And we were basically for like 3 years, we were doing like we created like an underground streetwear brand, right? That had like 1 foot in like the lifting culture and like 1 foot in like hip hop culture. And we
Was that the old school flannels?
yes,
Around that
right.
time?
So all
Okay.
right,
I
that's
remember
a story
those.
in and of itself. But yeah, so we did it. We
Yeah.
started doing t-shirts and snapbacks and all that kind of stuff. And we would do like these drops every like 6 weeks, 2 months. And like we're talking like 75 shirts at a time, right? Like nothing crazy, right? Enough to get the next round, enough to re-up and get the next round, right? But we did a bunch of like I feel like really cool, inspired, influential stuff in that time period. And during that time period, I also wrote the G Code books. I started to write those. The first of which, basically taking that writing experience and taking like sort of short form inspirational prose and like creating a book of essays, right? That grew out of Go Hard also. But the idea with it like wasn't to help that evolve into starting another company or anything like that. It was just like it was something to do as like a creative outlet, and it was cool and it was exciting and it was fun and it was rooted in this film project. And I thought to myself, like, maybe this becomes a thing that opens doors, and we sort of just hammered away at that nonstop for like 3 years. And it was sort of in that process that the idea for the supplement brand took root, because it seemed like something that I was most naturally inclined to do just because of my practical experience, right? And man, the idea has never it was never like, okay, you just launched the G Code brand and that somehow becomes like a global force and then you ride off into the sunset, right? It was like, okay, it's going to be a long uphill climb, but maybe you're able to carve out some territory in the subculture, grow the brand to the point that it's really stands apart from what everyone else is doing, and it's cranking on a level. And this is something that we're still working towards, right? But it's cranking on a level that you utilize that to open new doors, and then maybe at that point you're making art, or you're making films, or you have a Netflix series or whatever, right? Like so, like that was always kind of the idea that we would grow, that we were sort of naturally inclined to build the G Code brand, with these roots from Animal and these roots from our artistic, past and our experiences and our own sort of, proclivities and inclinations and tastes and aesthetics, right? Which are hip hop and all that sort of stuff that you don't really see in the supplement space, right? So it's like, okay, how can we build a brand that sort of stands apart from everybody else? And then who knows what that'll eventually evolve into and turn into. So that's sort of the next, that next level, that next, once we've taken G Code to the apex of the mountainside, then what, right? Then what, and what does that evolve into? And that's, that's something exciting to think of, for the future. But, we're still sort of neck deep in the daily dogfight of growing the brand.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, and part of it is a story of resilience, because I often say, like with G Code, with supplement, this industry in general, but with any startup or whatever, like you get your sea legs because it's up and it's down from day to day. And like one of the keys is that like you can't get too hyped when you're up and you can't get too depressed when you're down because it's like it's very cyclical and you're up and you're down. It's sort of the nature of things, you know. And it's like, you know, getting through COVID and all that sort of stuff. Like there, you know, there's so many inherent challenges to all that kind of stuff, and it's just sort of what comes with the territory. So, yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying how we eventually arrived at starting G Code, but you know, those seminal years were in that development of that Go Hard brand. And you were asking about you mentioned the flannels.
Yeah.
So one of the things we did with Go Hard was I was watching Jay-Z and Kanye, what the hell's the name of their album? What was the album that they did together? Watch the Throne.
Yeah.
Right. So they did a Watch the Throne tour. And at one point they're on stage together and they're both wearing these flannels with this huge logo on the back. And I was like, oh my God, that's fire, right? So I go and I look up the brand, which was Off-White, the late brilliant Virgil Abloh's brand. And I go looking up these flannels and I'm like, holy shit, they're $545 each. I was like, all right, well, I won't be buying one of those, unfortunately, right? So I go to bed that night and I all of a sudden it strikes me, right? And I thought to myself, well, shit, what if we just went to like thrift shops and bought all of their flannels and then screened the Go Hard logo on the back of the flannels and gave them away when people purchased our shirts, right? So you purchase a Go Hard shirt, you purchase a hat or a hoodie or whatever, and we just give you a shirt for free. And the cool thing about these shirts is that they're all one of one, right? Like those $545 Virgil Abloh Off-White shirts, probably mass produced in a factory somewhere, and they're all made from the same cloth, and they're awesome, but there's nothing all that unique or special about them. Whereas we give you this flannel from Go Hard, and it's a one of one flannel, right? You're not going to find another one the same pattern or anything. It's completely unique and different. So that was something that we did, and we did it for a while with some success. And I feel like it was something that people really liked. So it was just like one of those things, and there's a bunch of those things, like Black Hoodie Season, which I'm wearing right now. It's the concept of that. Its roots were in Go Hard. So there's like a bunch of stuff that I feel like we did that was different and unique and influential in its own way. And a lot of that stuff is just baked into the DNA of G Code.
Are those Black Hoodie Seasons on yet? Are they on the site?
I'm sorry, bro, I can't hear you.
Are the hoodies on the site now for sale?
Yes, there are. We haven't yet finalized a design for the new year, but there are some existing hoodies. We did a reissue of this design, which is one of the classic designs. We did that last year, and there's still some of those on the site. So yeah, there are some Black Hoodie Seasons on G Code Nutrition that are available in assorted sizes and whatnot. That's one of the things. Like we do a lot of stuff where it's kind of like one and done. So like there are sizes that are more popular and whatnot than others. So like some stuff will sell out and there's like no more XLs, but there's mediums. you know what I mean? So that happens a lot on our site where somebody will be like, dude, there's 7 shirts I wanted, but all you had was medium. And I'm like, man, I know.
It's a limited drop, right?
That's it, right? And it's like, how do you create that urgency for people to get excited about something if you just have an endless supply of them and they'll always be there? So that's right. I guess that's a consumer psychology thing or a branding thing. I don't know if it's valid, but it's been our approach.
Yeah. So for somebody like a young entrepreneur or somebody who wants to start a supplement business, right? What are the steps taken, like from start to finish? I mean, you don't have to give, all the specifics and details to this, but like, where do you start?
Well, I mean, I think one of the most important parts of it, right, is like to have a vision that is different and unique, something that's going to make your brand stand apart in a landscape where there's a lot of Me Tooism, there's a lot of copycat stuff, there's a lot of redundancy. So like what is going to be different about your products? What's going to be different about your brand? What's going to be different about your logo, your mission statement?
Mhm.
What are you going to do that stands apart from what everybody else is going to do? And a lot of the answer to that is rooted in who you are as a person. Who are you as a person? What makes, because that's one of the things, right? Like, and I know this is a cliche, and I'm getting this from somewhere, right? But like our own individual superpower is the fact that like no two people are the same, right? So like our life experiences, and like for example, you and I have, there's so much overlap in the stuff that we're interested in, but at the same time, there's a bunch of stuff that's unique and different about us
Right.
that makes us our own person, right? And it's like everybody is like that, and often to varying vast degrees, right? So it's like, okay, so what is it about you, your life experience, how you see branding, how you see the world, how you see how you see this subculture in this industry, if we're talking about supplements, what kind of supplements do you specifically like? What kind of supplements do you specifically believe in? What is different about those than what the competition might be doing, right? Like identifying all of those points of differentiation. Like I heard it put one time, and I think it's brilliant in terms of like thinking of yourself in terms of a startup, right? No matter what your aspirations are, right? Your aspirations might be
Mhm.
like a Fortune 500 company, right? But at first, you're not going to be that, right? God bless you. Maybe you get to that mountaintop and you are that eventually, but at first, you're not going to be that. Believe that you're not going to be that. That's just a fact, right? So when you're looking at the competition, right, you can either be greater than, less than, or different than, right? And
Mhm.
like you're not going to be greater than, right? Just because of the nature of things. If there's a company that's been around for 10 years and is established and has millions of dollars in the bank, you're not going to be greater than them, right? Even if what you're delivering is better than them at its essence, it's not going to be bigger, right? And have the reach that they
Right.
have and that sort of stuff, right? Initially, at least. So okay, so if you can't be greater than, if you can't outgun them with endless money and all that sort of stuff, right? And endless reach and influence, right? And you don't ever want to position yourself as being less than, right? You don't want to play
Mhm.
small ball and seem weak and feeble. You can be an underdog, which I feel like we are to this day. We're an underdog brand for sure. But we're not an underdog brand because our products suck or any of that stuff, right? We're not an underdog brand because we don't give a shit or we don't know what we're doing. That's not why we're an underdog brand, right? It's just a matter of firepower, right? So
Yeah.
you can't be greater than initially because you'd be lying to yourself, and you certainly don't ever want to position yourself as less than. But man, there are so many ways that you can differentiate yourself and be different than, other than, separate from, right?
Mhm.
And like, so those are the things that you need to double down on, right? The things that make you unique, whether it's your vision, your aesthetic, your view of the industry, what kind of products you're going to deliver, the demographic that you're targeting. Those are the ways, right, that you can be different than. So identify those things and double down on those things to the best of your ability. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, and then beyond that too, like what I realized in like ways that I could get stronger for sure is that like, people say, oh man, like they referring to like my past as a filmmaker, right? People would say, "Oh man, like Hollywood's an industry of relationships." It's like, no, man. What you realize is everything is an industry of relationships, right? So, like, where are the alliances that you can build that can help you? You know what I mean? Where are the
Mhm.
alliances that you can build that can help this process? Who is it that you have in your corner, or who do you need in your corner? Or where are the friendships or relationships that you have that help fortify what you're trying to do, right? And do what you can to make those stronger, right? Do what you can to add to your network, obviously, but you kind of like put together in your head like your dream team. Like, who do I have? Who do I know that can help this process? And maybe that helping this process means somebody who's an awesome graphic artist. Maybe helping the process means somebody who has connections to sales outlets. Maybe somebody who can help the process is somebody who knows social media inside out, right? Maybe somebody who can help the process is somebody who is a science has a science background, who knows supplements and ingredients, micronutrients, and that sort of stuff inside out, right? Like, where maybe there's people who are media connections, right? Like, maybe you have got friends who are athletes, people who would want to represent your brand out in the world, and in their spheres of influence. Whether those spheres of influence also is another thing. It's something we can talk about, right? We can get to, but oftentimes people say like, oh, well, that guy's got 100,000, a million followers, right? So like, well, man, if that guy with 1 million followers was talking highly about your brand, well, it's a no-brainer that your brand grows overnight in that case, right? And it's like, sure, sometimes, but not always, right? Not always. And every so often, there's people who represent your brand and have much smaller spheres of influence, but those spheres of influence are much more tightly knit and valuable, right? And they're going to represent your brand with a passion and commitment that like a mercenary who you were cutting a check to every month who's got 1 million followers wouldn't ever, right? And it's like, so maybe there's more value in that that relationship of the true believer who actually cares and supports you, right? So like that's something you learn too. But that's the thing. Put your team together, build that army. Think about who are the people who can help you in this process, and try to do whatever you can to strengthen those bonds and then incentivize them to help you. So that's another big part of it. Those are the obvious things, right? Like build a really strong team, double down on the stuff that makes you different from everybody else. I think that those are the real keys, and that just isn't just about our industry. I would assume that's whatever you're trying to do. If you're trying to make if you're opening a restaurant, or if you were trying to design start a sneaker company, I think a lot of those most important facets of brand building would be just as important. You know what I mean?
So for your brand, G Code, you launched with Vice, right? That was
Yeah,
the premier flagship product.
yeah.
So you have
that was our first product. Yeah, that was our first product.
So you have the idea
on day one, which was the Arnold Classic 2017, we didn't even have finished product yet. We didn't even have finished product.
Yeah, I think I remember that year.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So like pretty much what happened was that like we lined things up over the course of a really long time. And then like I kind of gave my notice at Animal and Universal. And then like 4 weeks later, I showed up at the Arnold Classic with the brand. Right? And like that window was so small that it was completely impossible to have product ready, right? So what we did have giant buckets of Vice, our pre-workout, the first product, and we were handing out samples of it in funnels, G-code funnels that we had made, and just handing those out and literally filling the funnels from the booth like in real time. And like we had a couple T-shirts and a hat and the G-code book, and that was it. But yeah, I cut you off, man. But yes, Vice was our first product. That was the product we launched with.
I think I still have one of those funnels upstairs. I got to go look after this.
Awesome,
because I remember that year when you were handing those out.
Like, and it's like, in some ways we're so far from that day, and then in many ways we're still exactly that same company. You know what I mean? That's what our roots are, which are very like, Wu-Tang selling tapes out of the trunk of their car. Like that's part of the DNA of our brand, in that way, for sure.
Yeah. So you had the idea for Vice.
You were going to ask me something about Vice specifically, or why Vice.
Yeah. So, just like the starting point, you have the idea for Vice. Then what do? You find a manufacturer who could.
Right. Well, So that was a process, right? Like that was a process that was in development for some time, right? Because, so when we sort of began the process of even starting G-code, myself and Tara had just had twins, right? And that was on the backs of having my daughter Sienna 20 months prior to that, right? So like we had, 3 kids under the age of 3 or 4 when we launched G. We had 3 kids under the age of 4 when we launched G-code, right? And for the first like couple of years, my last couple of years at Animal and Universal, they were like a blur to me, man, because I was on no sleep, right? And in that time, like on no sleep at all, but I was still training and all that stuff. And during that time period, a pre-workout for me personally went from being like a cool thing I would use on occasion to an absolute necessity to survive. Right? And so like that was where the motivation was for Vice. It was like, man, like what if I could craft the pre-workout that I need right now, right?
Mhm.
And so the idea was to like make a pre-workout that could be strong enough and sort of scaled up or down depending on what you needed specifically, right? Like all the 100 factors that involve like your experience, your stimulant tolerance, the time of day you
Mhm.
train, and obvious stuff like body weight, right? Like body weight plays an issue with all this stuff too, right? Like if you're a 300-pound dude or a 100-pound girl, there's a chance that your dose of pre-workout might be different, just like how stiff a drink you could handle, right? Right? Like
Yep.
you
Yep.
might be able to handle more vodka at 300 pounds than you do at 100 pounds, right? So the same thing with Vice, right? And then the other idea was like, and you and I have talked about this on the pod several times before, right? Like there's pre-workouts that really push the envelope in terms of like some of like the gray market stimulants that they utilize and whatnot, right? And like that's all well and good, like if you're going to use it here or there, and if you have a decent tolerance for that kind of thing, right? But it isn't necessarily sustainable to use it every day for a prolonged period of time, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
how can I make that pre-workout that kicks enough ass and does the job that I need it to do, but is as healthy as it possibly can be, right? So
Right.
that was also one of the motivations behind Vice. So it's like, all right, make this pre-workout that's strong as it needs to be and has everything in it that you need, but then also that can be relied upon day to day, but that also I can continue to use for months and years on end and not have health implications from it, right? Like as a substitute for a couple of shots of espresso, right? But to still be a performance product. And then one of the
Mhm.
other things behind it, and it's really funny, right? My daughter, we were talking about random stuff, and somehow I found myself talking about, and it reminds me of my eldest daughter Madison and something that she would have said to me 20 years ago, which is hilarious because it came out of Sienna's mouth, and I said that's the most Maddie thing you've ever said. Was we were we were talking about drinks and juice and whatever, and I was telling her about some like orange pineapple Welch's juice that I remember from when I was like a teenager and how it was the best juice ever. And she said to me, Daddy, why are you so obsessed with old juice? And I laughed, right? Because like one of the reasons that I feel like G Code exists and we do what we do is because I've always been obsessed with drinks and flavors of drinks and all that kind of stuff, right? Like I think like the Coca-Cola freestyle machine is the coolest thing ever, right? So like one of the things that informed the first flavors of Vice was like, let's have these flavors be soda inspired, right? Like let's think of what are the coolest flavors of soda, that you could get at the supermarket or get at 7-Eleven or Wawa, right? And let's have pre-workouts be that flavor, right? So the first ever flavor of Vice was grape, and it was inspired by like grape Sunkist soda, grape Crush, right? And then
Mhm.
we initially had three flavors, right? Three individual flavors of Vice in 15 serving containers. And we did one that was Mountain Dew inspired, one that was Grape Crush inspired, and one that was cherry Coke or cherry Pepsi inspired, right? And
Yep.
those were like our three flavors. So like we're talking about points of differentiation, right? It's like, all right, so here's this pre-workout that you can scale up or down based on what you need, and it hits hard enough, but it also is pretty healthy. It's got beetroot powder and sea salt. The only stimulants in it are caffeine, coffee, and tea extract. It's got a ton of B vitamins. It's got all the performance actives. Like that was like the impetus of like a point of differentiation for a formula. And then it's like, okay, how do we flavor it differently? All right, well, let's do these soda inspired flavors, right? And then the next step to it was like, all right, instead of just giving people one flavor, let's do these 15 serving tubs. I mean, instead of doing a 30 serving or 40 serving or whatever, let's do 15 serving tubs, but let's do three of them and shrink wrap them together and give them and that'll be how we present the pre-workout. So that was another
Mhm.
point of differentiation, right? Instead of giving you
Yep.
one flavor, we give you three, right? There's soda inspired instead of just like typical, right? Typical fruit punch or whatever, right? There's something different. And then, the formula is um, different and more healthy than a lot of the alternatives, right? So it's like think about Jack 3D back in the day. It's like, all right, like this is our healthier version of that, right? Like this is our
Yeah.
healthier, more sustainable version of that. You know, let's
Mhm.
like I said, let's put beetroot and sea salt in it as two of like the most important components, like nature's pump, right? Let's give that, right? That's every Vice flavor to this day. Vice Triple X, they're they're red, right? They're red because of the beetroot. And that's another thing. If we're talking another point of differentiation, right? Like in that early development stage, right? When we're working on just getting samples made, right? Like the one flavor was supposed to be Mountain Dew inspired. And I'm talking to the food scientists and the guys in development from the manufacturer we were working with at the time, and they're like, listen, man, I pumped this thing full of every color in the world, and I can't get it to look like Mountain Dew because of the beetroot. And right there, I was like, you know what, man? Then let's not put anything in it, and let's just leave it exactly the color it is. And from that point forward, that became another defining principle. Let's not put any artificial colors in any of our products, right? You think about your kids, right? And it's like, and don't get me wrong, like we're not saints. My daughters will have Hawaiian Punch or Gatorade or whatever the fuck that has the artificial colors in it and stuff. It's just almost unavoidable. We're not those parents. That said, if you give me a choice between a product without artificial dyes and those kind of, chemicals in red 40 and blue, the blue number, yellow number 5 and all those, if I can avoid those, of course I'm going to avoid those. I don't want my kids to drink that shit if they don't need to, or eat that stuff if they don't need to, right? I'll often opt for the choice that doesn't have that stuff in there. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm making that decision for my kids, why wouldn't I just naturally make that decision for myself also? So from that point forward, I thought one of our other principles is like artificial dyes, that kind of stuff. We won't put any of that stuff in our products. So that was another defining characteristic, that none of our products have any artificial colors in them. And it's like, all right, well, there's one more thing that makes us different from the competition. Who's blue raspberries, bright blue? All right, well, we're not going to do that. So it's like coming up with these little things that just made Vice, if G Code and Vice and our brand can't at first be greater than, and it sure as fuck over my dead body won't be less than, then at the very least it's going to be different than, and we're going to use all these points of differentiation to stand out from what everybody else is doing. And the other thing is like, it's the other challenge, and this is something we'll get to, right, is then communicating that, trying to communicate that to people, right, that we exist and we're different than what you're used to.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually always thought that first iteration of original Vice and the new Vice, not the Triple X one, was just as good of a nootropic, like a daily something you can just sip on, as it was a pre-workout. And like the flavoring was awesome. So I'm a type of dude who mixes a pre-workout and chugs it. I don't even care about the flavor.
Sure.
But with something like Vice, I could just sit and sip on that all day, and the flavoring is awesome, and it gives you good sustained energy instead of cracking you out, and then you crash half hour later.
No, man, there's no doubt. And the funny thing about Vice, right, and even Triple X, I can say about Triple X is like, you don't crash on the formulas. But one of the reasons that I don't think you do is because we don't put anything weird in there, right? It's essentially like, it's the same reason that, like, even if you have a high, at least I feel this is the case, it's got green tea in there, and it's got coffee bean extract. It's got beetroot and sea salt, right? So like, much of the foundation of the product are these natural ingredients with polyphenols and natural factors in them that are different than a lot of pre-workouts, right? And to me, it was almost similar. And this is, don't get me wrong, this is entirely bro science, but it felt like the same reason that Vice never became ineffective for me, that I didn't all of a sudden need 3 scoops and I wouldn't feel it anymore and all that, right? Is the same reason why if you go to Starbucks and get a double shot of espresso, even if you have a high caffeine tolerance, you're still going to feel it, right? Like you're not going to not feel that. You're going to feel that, right? Unless there's something wrong with you, that your adrenal glands are so fried, you're going to go get that double shot of espresso and you're going to feel it, right? And I feel like Vice is the same way. And I think a lot of it is rooted in the fact that there's not a bunch of weird chemicals in there. There's natural ingredients that are, touted and proven for circulation, for blood flow. And then beyond that, right, there's ingredients in there that, like I said, if the only stimulants in there are caffeine, coffee, and tea extract, right? And then like even on the jacked up version of it with Triple X, right? It's guarana, it's theobromine, which is found in chocolate, right?
Mhm.
It's yerba mate, right, which is an ancient, it's an ancient ingredient that is found in many teas. It's an ancient,
Mhm.
medicine for helping with vitality and energy and focus. Like so we include those kind of ingredients because we feel like those sort of stand the test of time in terms of human biochemistry, and they continue to work for you in a way that doesn't undermine your health, doesn't fry your adrenal glands, and like I said, it's just kind of sustainable. That's one of the biggest things for me, man, is that we didn't want to develop, especially when we're talking about the pre-workout category, we just didn't want to develop a product that you use for a month and then you don't feel it anymore. You know what I mean? Or you
Right.
use it for a month and you 5 scoops. It was like you and I talked about some of the amphetamine analog pre-workouts where it's like, okay, well, I took it for a little while and now I had a double dose and now I have to triple dose. And then when I would meet people who were like, yeah, man, I'm taking 4 scoops of whatever, 1 MR or whatever the pre-workout was that was jacked up with all the crazy shit in it. And it's like, so now I'm doing like a gram of caffeine plus like 4 times the dose of DMAA or DMHA. And I think to
Yeah.
myself, yeah, like that is not sustainable. You
No.
just can't keep doing that. What are you gonna be doing? 20 scoops? Like what? Just you can't do that.
Yeah.
So the idea was like, all right, how do we make Vice something that people can? That was it, man. Rely on. You know,
Hmm.
and like when we talk about like mission statements, right? Like there's stuff that I always say like that the brand is developed for like real people in the real world doing extraordinary things, right? I say that a lot, right? Meaning that like sure, there's a lot of stuff that we can make for elite athletes and the best, and we have helped power some incredible athletes who've achieved on a really high level over the years, right? But then at the same time, like the brand also exists for like real people like you and I who have
Hmm.
families and 100 responsibilities and are torn in a million, pulled in a million directions, right? Torn to pieces from day to day. But nonetheless, our training is a priority. We're not interested in being average fucking Joes, right? We're trying to
Right.
hold ourselves to a higher standard. And like, okay, here's a brand that, and this is another, cliche catchphrase that I use for our brand is that here's a brand that's going to provide tools to empower, right?
Hmm.
It's going to give me the stuff that I need to help my process, right? And my process is directly linked to whatever my goals and dreams are. This brand is going to give me stuff that helps to fuel that process, right? And like, and that's exactly what I think of advice. It's just a tool to empower people, and in that way, it becomes this sort of steady, reliable thing that you can count on, and that's a big deal. Like I want to be that as a man. I want to be that as a human being,
Right.
right? And then I want our brand to be the kind of thing where you're like, oh, I know those guys are solid. I know those products are solid. I've used them and I've had good experiences with them. I know I can keep coming back to them. Like, can we be that brand that's got your back, that's your ally on your pursuit? That's what I want us to be.
Hmm. And that's, not a lot of brands have that, slogan behind them. A
Right,
lot of it's like, for the past 10 years or so, it's been like, take these products to look good at the pool party in Vegas.
right,
And it
right.
doesn't translate over to the
Or,
everyday
or,
guy.
or be your most alpha self, right?
Yeah.
That kind of shit. And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, like I'd rather us kind of be a brand that, like I said, is more like the dependable ally that you have who has your back through thick and thin. Like I want our brand to be thought of like that, and for people to like make positive emotional connections with our products. You know, because that's the kind of thing, right? Branding. That's one of the things with branding, and this isn't insincere when I say it, right? Like a lot of the brands that you feel most strongly about is because you link them to important periods in your life, to positive states of being, to specific accomplishments, to specific achievements, to good times or bad times, right? Like what was there for you, what helped you in these instances, right? To get to the next level, to get through these challenges, right? And it's like I want our brand to be that. I want our brand to be that brand that like that you can count on. that you could count on, And then, like I said, it's one of the most underrated things, right? Like, just in terms of human beings, right? Like, be somebody who's dependable and who you can count on and who's going to have your back, right? Like, I want our brand to be thought of in that way, that we've got your back, and like, and that permeates every aspect of what we do and informs every relationship we have, right? It's like, can consumers come to us for advice, or can consumers, if they purchase a product and something's not right about it and it goes sideways, like, are we going to take care of them? Are we going to go out of our way to make sure that they're, properly compensated and that their transaction ends up being a satisfactory one? Like, can you make people feel good about doing business with you and patronizing your brand? And it's like, that's always the goal, It's always the goal, because it's about those relationships are so important. It's about more than just selling product. It's about being something that people can depend on and believe in,
Yeah. What's on the calendar for the rest of 2024, 2025? Any new
So,
launches or
it's there's products in development. Some stuff that's going to be different, some stuff that I'm excited about, and some stuff that, like, sort of, just as, like, I told you about, like, that the motivations, right? Like, the very personal motivations behind originally developing Vice and some of our other products, right? Rise. Like, Rise is our amino recovery elixir, right? And it's sort of like a combination of a BCAA EAA product with a sports drink, with a with, like, a general amino blend, and then with, like, an immune support product, like a Airborne, right? It's like a combination of an Airborne with a good, a good sports drink, with a robust amino product, right? It's all of those things at once. And, like, the tagline for that product is "Weather the Storm," right? With the idea being that, like, life can be ultra challenging, and often, like, beyond just the challenges of beating yourself to death in the gym on a regular basis, right? And tearing muscle down and having to bounce back from that, right? Life can just be challenging at times, and we're not sleeping as much as we can, as much as we need to, ideally, right? And, maybe our diet's not 100% on point, and, you go through flu season, or you go through COVID, right? You go through these periods where your immune system is under assault. It's like, what can we create a product that can help you be resilient and stand up to the elements, right? Not just of your training, but of life in general, right? Like, that was the motivation behind Rise, right? And I could tell you this little, poetic story about so many of the products that we have, right?
I think that goes to, sorry to cut you off, that there's
Yeah,
purpose, like real purpose behind each of the products. And that
right. And
fits into the authenticity of your brand.
yeah, man, and I think that that's part of it, right? Like, so much of, like, the things, some of the best things that have ever developed, right, are brought a necessity, right? Like, you see this need, maybe it's just this need in your own life, and you think to yourself, it can't just be me who feels like this. So let's see, what if we could develop a product for all the guys who feel like that out there, all the girls who feel like that out there. Like, maybe we can create something for them that could help them in their process. So in terms of what's on the calendar for the rest of the year, there's some products in development. One of the key ones is a product that is being developed in sort of the same way Vice was, because I see a space in our line for it, and I see a necessity in people's lives for it. So I think that could be something cool. I'm not going to give away too much of it, but I feel like there's a ton of people who want this thing, and maybe want this thing and don't even realize it. And I feel like in a highly caffeinated society, there's very much a place for this. So there's that. And then one of the other things is, restocks are huge for us. Like, we were just able to restock King, and we were just able to restock Strawberry Shortcake Fuel, which is our whey isolate product. That's a fantastic flavor. It's one of those where, if you like strawberry protein, you realize what a nightmare it is to find a good one, and this is a fantastic one. I've been the guy who stumbled upon a couple of good strawberry proteins in my life and was thrilled with them, and then just on the strength of those experiences, went and bought like a 5-pound whey that was strawberry, and it was awful. And then I had to choke down 80 servings of it. Right, I've been that guy. So, like, I take tremendous pride in saying, like, this is the best strawberry protein I probably ever had. So that's incredibly cool, and we have that back in stock. We have King, which we can talk about more later, and then I'm also working on a new flavor of an existing product in our line, so that's something super cool. So there's a bunch of stuff in the works, and at our best, we really crank on restocks and new flavors and product development, and that's like one of my goals in the next few months is for us to really sort of manifest that and to crank at a much higher level than I feel like we have been in recent months. Not just in restocks, but in new stuff. I feel like the lifeblood. If you want another tip, in terms of just my personal experiences, I feel like one of the lifebloods of developing brands is creating new stuff, right? The energy and enthusiasm that's created by your core supporters, you can stoke that and you can fuel that by giving them new stuff, new flavors, right? Because I one of the things, and talk about like the tri-pack of Vice or the tri-chamber of Triple X, right? And one of the things you realize, and I think we talked about this in the pod before, right, is the idea that you and I, as consumers, there's no doubt this has happened before, where we've come across a product that we really like, and even though we love that product, we strayed just to try a different flavor of something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can develop a product that's really good that people really like, and then consistently give them new versions of it, in terms of flavor, you can really keep them on board and keep them excited about that product. And I think that sort of just spreads in just has a halo effect over your whole brand. So at our best, I feel like we've really cranked on new flavors and new SKUs, and I'm determined for us to be that in the coming months.
Okay. Yeah, and I think new is not necessarily great if you're doing new for the sake of doing new. Like you see brands all the time just reformulate a product out of nowhere for no reason. There's no reason to reformulate it, and then you go and try it, and it's not as effective anymore because there's an ingredient that was working well for you.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, flavors is the way to do it, in my opinion.
Yo, no doubt. There's no doubt. Absolutely, and that's one of those things. Like, and I feel like we take flavoring seriously, and we do flavoring pretty well. An interesting thing talking about Vice and Triple X and all that is that people will comment how it tastes different than a lot of pre-workouts, and some people will say it's got an earthy taste to it, right? Because of the beetroot. Because every scoop's got a gram of beetroot powder in it, right? But beetroot is this incredible pump ingredient, this incredible general health ingredient. You'll see commercials for products that are entirely just beet powders, right? It's a very important component of Vice. And one of the interesting things I think from a flavoring perspective is that Vice has a gram of beetroot powder in every scoop, and because of it tastes different than a lot of pre-workouts do. It cuts that chemical edge that a lot of pre-workouts has, and it turns it into more of a juice. It tastes more juicy in that way.
Right.
And I think that's an incredibly cool thing. So once you're used to that, people be like, oh man, I can taste the beetroot. Once you're used to that, I think you like it and look forward to it because it tastes a little bit less like a chemical pre-workout and it tastes a little bit more like a juice. And I think that's generally more of a positive experience,
Yeah.
For sure. So yeah,
right,
new flavors and better flavors and interesting flavors and unique flavors. And the more of those, the better, I think. The more we can do that, the better.
All right. So that was about an hour. You want to wrap it? Is that cool?
Hey, man, it was fantastic, though.
Well, you go on for like 4 hours and my wife will be.
I appreciate you giving all this shine to the G-Code brand, man. It was not the impetus behind us starting this thing, but you hit me up and you're like, for our next thing, let's talk about the background of G-Code. I was like, all right, man, cool. It's awesome.
I've always wanted to know.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, man. I appreciate you giving me a platform to talk about it, man. I was gonna say to you though, just recently you got a little something, right? The mailman dropped a little something off, right? G-Code related, right? Are you gonna incorporate it into your process?
I am.
Awesome.
It's in the stack right now that I'm taking.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I mean, it's probably still too early for results from
for sure.
T-Booster, but
what we're talking about is King, right? Which is our natural test booster,
Yeah.
and it's a very straightforward product in that regard. And I feel like there's almost no man over the age of 30 who wouldn't benefit from having it into their protocol, right? So it's like it's good for I feel like it's good for any man as he ages, right? Because our testosterone starts to naturally decline beyond the age of 30. But it's good for enhanced athletes off cycle. It's good for lifetime drug-free guys. It's good for guys on TRT or HRT. I feel like there's almost no male athlete who's pushing themselves who wouldn't pushing themselves when I mean that just regular vigorous physical activity
Right.
who wouldn't benefit from having it in their protocol. And one of the big reasons too is just like we're talking about green tea and coffee bean extract and beetroot and sea salt and advice, right? The foundation of, before you're even talking about the herbs, there's like 2,000 milligrams of 4 pretty powerful test boosting herbs, that are like, touted for centuries, right? That are in King. But the real foundation of that thing is zinc, magnesium, and vitamin D3. And, study after study after study shows that pretty much every athlete who trains hard ends up being deficient in zinc, magnesium, and D3, to the point that, two interesting things, to the point that like the entire Balco Labs scandal, right? Which started with track stars and then all the Bay Area athletes on the Niners, the Raiders, the Giants, the A's, all those guys, right? The whole thing started because Victor Conte, the guy who started Balco Labs, who eventually with Patrick Arnold developed the cream and the clear and all that shit, right? And it will live on in infamy, right? But brilliant guys. It initially just started that Victor Conte was like a blood work nerd, and the track athletes who train in that sort of like the nice climate and conditions of Northern California, he ran their blood work, like Olympic athletes ran their blood work, and to a man, every one of them was deficient in zinc and magnesium, right? And once they started to regularly supplement zinc and magnesium, right, which he eventually patented as ZMA, once they started to supplement zinc and magnesium, all of a sudden their natural test increased, their sleep rapidly improved, their recovery rapidly improved, like in a marked way, where a couple weeks after supplementing, they felt like new people. And I think he kind of leveraged that to say like, oh, you like that? Well, we got this for you. And that's where it went sideways, right? But and the other thing is that I heard somebody talking about, living through the pandemic and what was involved in that. And like one of the major life hacks of surviving the pandemic, beyond any kind of massive lifestyle changes or anything along those lines, and beyond anything like directly related to the medical community or a medical intervention or vaccines or anything like that, one of the great life hacks for surviving the pandemic in good health was, do you take care of yourself in terms of training, right? Are you in good shape, decent shape, right? Do you exercise regularly, and is that a part of your lifestyle? Do you supplement with zinc and D3? Like, if you had those 3 things going for you, you were kind of more bulletproof than the general population during the pandemic. So like that alone, like sort of underscores how important those basic micronutrients are. And that's the foundation of King. So like, I feel like it's one of those products that is just beneficial for pretty much any man over the age of 30. And it's like something I rely on heavily. So I always get excited about when somebody new who's sort of like in my demographic is now incorporating into their program, because I think to myself, like, maybe this is the little thing that they were missing, and like it could make a big difference, And that goes for everybody. Like, I got a buddy up the street who's just getting into like distance running, and he's just starting to train with weights, and now he's on King. And it's like, all right, and like, didn't really have much supplement experience, and I'm like, okay, it's gonna be interesting to see how he reacts to it, because I swear by it, and I know there's a lot of people who swear by it. So it's exciting to see it benefit other people,
And I haven't been supplementing with zinc or magnesium, so I should feel a good benefit.
I think that zinc, magnesium, and D3 is one of those things that once you start using it consistently, in the course of a couple of weeks, you just notice a difference, and that foundation alone is enough to make King effective and noticeably effective, and that's just the start of it. That's just the start of the product. So.
And then what do you have? Ashwagandha, fenugreek?
Ashwagandha, fenugreek, and Uricoma longifolia, which is long jack or Tongkat Ali. 2,000 milligrams total of those 4 ingredients. And it's one of those, And those ingredients are ingredients where some people swear by them, and some people wonder if they're even effective at all. And there's like a broad spectrum of opinion on it. But one of the big reasons that I've identified as being that broad spectrum, and there being some validity to people being skeptical for sure, is the fact that, man, you see these infomercial test boosters, right? And the shit that they sell at CVS and all that, right? That are not cheap either, right? That are $50, $60 at CVS or wherever, Walgreens, or online, like on an infomercial. And they literally pixie dust these ingredients in there. And then somebody says, "Oh, I took something with that in there, and it didn't work for me at all." Well, of course it didn't work for you, because it was 1/100th of the dose that you need to get anything out of it. You know what I mean? So of course that didn't work for you. Or they use the worst, the least standardized, cheapest version of that ingredient in there. So of course it wasn't effective for you. So for us, when you take King, in every serving of it, you get 600 milligrams of ashwagandha, 600 milligrams of tribulus, 500 milligrams of fenugreek, and 300 milligrams of the Tongkat Ali. So it's 2,000 milligrams of those herbs that you're getting every day. And it's like at those robust dosages, built upon the foundation of the zinc, magnesium, and D3, it certainly is a formula that's robust enough that people are going to notice a difference when they take it, And that's one of the reasons that I believe in it. And, the development of that product is a product that's a lifetime in the works, because, as a guy who's trained drug-free my whole life, I've tried it all. And I've basically been making a running list of stuff that I found effective and stuff that was shit. And in that, in that time period, like, it sort of informs your product development. And that's sort of what King came from. Everything that's in it is something that I or athletes in my circle have utilized and felt strongly about in terms of their efficacy. So as long as we're providing them in dosages that are noteworthy and worthwhile, I feel like it's a product that can really be effective for guys like us.
Yeah, and safe. I want to point that out, because some people think test booster and they're like, "Oh, I'm taking steroids and I need to do a PCT after I take this," and it's like, no, this is just a supplement to
right. And one of the reasons,
testosterone.
For sure. And one of the reasons they feel that way is because they're conditioned to feel that way, because they've utilized products over the years that, like, were Trojan horsing in some like oral steroids or gray market pro hormones or SARMs or whatever. And they took them and they felt awesome. And then they came off them and felt like shit. And they were, and they needed a PCT, or they needed, a product like King to help them get back on track. And it was unbeknownst to them that they were even taking in, those ingredients along with their standard, like, herbal test booster. So that's one of the reasons that people either think it's bunk entirely, or this stuff is just like steroids and I can't take that. Like, the idea, talking about sustainability, right? The idea behind the King formula is that the kind of thing that you can use, for an indefinite amount of time and rely on and feel good on. And one of those things too, that you're going to take it for a while. When you come off it, you're like, "Oh man, I felt good when I was on King. Let me get back on it." And that's one of those other things that feels like proof that it works,
Yeah.
So yeah, I was going to plug for King. We'll do a follow-up where I can get some feedback, stuff you've noticed while you've used it. Because I feel like you're pretty in tune with your body and how it reacts to stuff. So I think that's a cool study. You're a cool case study.
Yeah. All right, I'll give you a rundown, like, week by week. So let me take it through this week. I'll let you know how.
It's valuable. That's valuable feedback.
Yeah,
man. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I'll track. I'll try to see what markers I could track for it. But
yeah, that would be cool as well.
Because I feel like
that would be incredibly cool. Yeah, we've had some guys in our circle, do before and after blood work, or so a lot of this feedback is anecdotal. But then we've had other guys who've done before and after blood work, and the proof is in the pudding. So, yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what you noticed.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, man. So we'll be back, and we'll do more of like a traditional pod that's more like fitness and sports and pop culture and whatnot. But thanks for giving me the opportunity, man, to talk about G Code. It's awesome.
Yeah, man, this is awesome. learned a lot more from the brand. I think you had some really, really good points to give to people starting businesses and um, navigating their way around the sports nutrition industry.
And man, you know, our brand, myself personally, we are a work in progress. You know what I mean? And it's ongoing, and we're learning every day. You know, and it's oftentimes a trial by fire, and it's you know, you're yeah, you just we're a case study in entrepreneurship happening in real time. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like I'm learning as I go as well, and I'm, you know, honored and blessed and privileged to share the ups and downs of that process with anybody who gives a shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I appreciate you, bro.
it's all part of the journey. It's not the
That's
end
it,
point,
man.
right?
That's it. One day at a time, bro.